Hello, and welcome to the Care Machine Sustainable Healthcare podcast. I'm your host, Professor Helen Mees. In 2026, the conversation around corporate responsibility and global reporting in healthcare will become both urgent and sophisticated, especially within the NHS supply chain. With the NHS committed to achieving net zero direct emissions by 2040 and supply chain emissions by 2045, the medtech sector now finds itself at the epicentre of this transformation. Over 71% of the NHS's carbon footprint is generated by purchased goods and services, making the role of medtech and supply chain partners absolutely pivotal. This evolving landscape brings formidable challenges. Medtech companies must now navigate a complex regulatory environment, with requirements such as the Evergreen Assessment becoming mandatory from April 2026. Only suppliers meeting Level 1 sustainability standards will be eligible for NHS contracts, while annual carbon reduction plans and transparent Scope 1, 2 and 3 emission reporting will no longer be optional. Additionally, the sector faces heightened scrutiny around ethical sourcing and modern slavery, with all major suppliers required to achieve a minimum 40% score on the Modern Slavery Assessment Tool, MSAT. Yet these regulations also create significant opportunities. Medtech innovators are responding by investing in digital traceability, life cycle analysis and collaborative supplier networks to improve both environmental and social outcomes. Companies that can demonstrate verifiable reductions in carbon emissions, waste and resource use are gaining a competitive edge as NHS procurement increasingly favours those who can deliver measurable social value alongside clinical excellence. There's a growing appetite for partnerships that drive systemic change, whether through sustainable product design, circular supply models, or transparent data-driven impact reporting. As the NHS and its suppliers adapt, the medtech industry stands at a crossroads. Those who embrace this new era of responsible business will help shape a more sustainable, resilient healthcare system for the UK and beyond. In part 1 of this double episode on sustainability, corporate responsibility and global reporting, I start by focusing on the NHS and its vast supply chain. My guest is Heidi Barnard, Head of Sustainability at NHS Supply Chain. Heidi has led a dedicated team for the last 4 years in shaping and implementing the roadmap for net zero across £3.5 billion in annual spend, embedding ESG principles into procurement and supplier engagement. Over the past decade, Heidi has directed strategies that have transformed supply chains into engines of resilience and innovation. In her role in NHS Supply Chain, her work bridges climate risk, ethical sourcing and circular economy practices, delivering measurable impact against the NHS's long-term business goals. Heidi is recognised as someone who thrives on turning complexity into clarity, influencing senior stakeholders and driving change that matters for both people and planet. And she is clear about her personal mission: to help organisations lead boldly on sustainability, not just to comply. I began by asking Heidi about her transition from heavy industry into healthcare and what it's like being responsible for affecting sustainable change across the entire NHS supply chain. Heidi, thank you for coming on today's podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on the show. Now, you, like James Dixon, who I had on the last episode, have come to the NHS via industry, that being British Gypsum in your case. What drew you to the healthcare sector, in particular to NHS supply chain?
So yeah, I did 15 years in the private sector in industry, as you said, and I was looking for something different. I've been working in sustainability my whole career, and it is my passion. And having been in one sector for a long time, I didn't want to be pigeonholed in that, and I wanted to kind of expand and continue to learn and grow. And moving sector was really kind of what that was all about. When I was looking at that point for a role, there was actually a number of things coming up in the NHS, which has started me to look in the healthcare sector and understand, okay, what does sustainability mean from a healthcare perspective? And it was a really interesting time, and it was a real kind of coming together of both the environmental sustainability that I've worked in for a while, but also the kind of the social values based kind of draw to the to what we do for a living and what sustainability people like myself really get a kind of a real sense of purpose out of. So that was kind of what drew me to it. And I actually started in a trust in Greater Manchester. So I was up in the north of Manchester for 3 years before I joined NHS Supply Chain in 2022. So I joined the NHS 6 months before the pandemic, which was an interesting
Wow.
time to
Yeah.
shift sectors and very much a very steep learning curve very, very quickly in terms of what sustainability meant both in the healthcare sector but at that time.
Yeah, I was talking to James about that very same thing, and thinking about how the NHS was just getting started with its green initiative, and then to be hit by the pandemic was a huge impact really for the NHS as a whole, but it must have been incredibly challenging for you.
I think so, and it for me it was really interesting. So I came in, and there was a number of things that had been going on in the NHS for about 10 years, and in the guise of things like sustainable development plans that each trust were working on. We then started to go down the net zero, and delivering a net zero NHS was published in the October of 2020, which was obviously the year of the pandemic. So despite the pandemic, that work still continued because it was seen as so important, because whilst the immediate short-term issue we were facing was the pandemic, we know that actually one of the potential impacts of climate change and of what we're seeing in the world is the likelihood of more pandemics. So actually these two things, both looking at really short-term and really long-term at the same time, both really quite pivotal in the work we do. So yeah, so the immediacy of actually what we were facing on a day-to-day basis, and really making it very tangible for people. So if you think about from a trust perspective, the amount of PPE we were consuming and the just the stuff and of we were working through every day, and really brought to life actually the need to have a way of managing that, understanding that, and dealing with it in a way that is sustainable both physically, environmentally, but also financially.
Yeah, yeah, of course. So you have now been head of sustainability for NHS Supply Chain now for 3 years, with a clear mandate to empower people across the NHS to deliver on the Greener initiative, as you've said. What does that look like in terms of the strategic objectives of the NHS as a whole?
So the NHS has set out really clear ambitions around net zero. As I mentioned earlier, delivering a net zero NHS was published in 2020, and there were two really key targets that were in there. So there was net zero for the emissions we control directly by 2040, and for the emissions that are indirect to us by 2045, with some really interesting interim targets as well. So it wasn't just about the full net zero journey, but there's also an 80% target for both of those that come a number of years earlier. So for the emissions we control directly, that's between 2028 and 2032, which is very soon. And for the indirect emissions, that's between 2036 and 2039. So again, a little bit longer, but still coming at us quite rapidly. And in NHS
Yeah.
supply chain, where we are procuring goods and services on behalf of the NHS, so much of our emissions are in our scope 3 emissions. If you think about just the pure size and scale of the volume of stuff that we buy, that big part of the pie chart, which is the indirect emissions, and particularly those from goods and services, is what we are here to support delivery of.
Yeah. So in terms of focusing on that, are you just focused on that particular scope, or does it sort of trickle into the other parts of the scopes that you have to focus on, or at least be aware of?
Yeah, so it's because of the nature of what we do as an organisation, which is around the goods and services, the vast majority of our impacts are in scope 3. So we're talking 99% are in scope 3. That doesn't mean that we don't have impacts in scope 1 and 2 that we are also thinking about. So from our warehouses to our logistics fleet to our own offices and our own operations, we need to be considering what we do in those spaces as well as what we do in our scope 3. And they're often the things that for our own teams are more tangible and visible. So things like how we go about managing our office and our estate, what we're doing with that. When we think about our logistics contract and what we're doing with our warehousing strategy, again, we need to think about those targets and work those into how we deliver operationally.
Now, I thought just for the purposes of this podcast, I'd just talk about some of the stats really around the NHS. Now, it is the biggest employer in the UK, and in terms of supply of equipment and consumables, and please correct me if I've got these stats wrong, it handles over 8 million orders annually from over 1,100 suppliers, delivering over 35 million lines of picked goods. And its overall spend on medical equipment and consumables is approximately £8 billion a year. Now that's quite a set of statistics, isn't it? Just to give our viewers the sheer size and scale of it. So how on earth do you go about managing something that's that size and ensuring that it remains environmentally sustainable?
Like any big challenge, you kind of have to eat the elephant one bite at a time. You can't eat, and not there's the numbers can be quite scary. But actually,
Yeah.
when you begin to break it down and think about what are the things we can do on a daily basis, how do we begin to think about this? So, and again, the stats are very much about what we do as NHS Supply Chain as an organisation as part of the NHS family. So to begin with, what we think about is, right, so where are our biggest impacts? So one of the first things that we did when I joined was actually do some hotspotting around really beginning to get a grip of, okay, what's the size and scale of our carbon impact? What does that look like? What does that tell us about where we need to concentrate? So we did that exercise to again be able to put ourselves in the context of what do we look like compared to a trust in terms of the carbon footprints in those 3 scopes, but also in terms of the overall NHS, where do we fit? What's our part to play in this? The next thing is then to really understand, well, what of our supply base already doing? We don't operate in a vacuum, neither do they. They have other customers, they work in other regions. So again, where are they at? What can we learn from what they're doing already? And this is where things like the NHS England supply roadmap have been quite helpful. So things like carbon reduction plans, and now what we've done with the Evergreen Assessment is giving us that understanding of where our supply chain and our suppliers are with us on this journey. So we've now got 95% of our spend covered by Evergreen Assessments, which gives me some great insight into understanding actually what our suppliers are doing and where they are on their own carbon journeys. So what that then allows us to do is think about the levers we have to pull as procurers in the NHS. So the way I term this is buy less, buy better, and buy different. So buy less is actually about before we even think about what our suppliers are doing, what are we doing? Are we actually using all of the stuff we buy? Are we buying it in the right way? So getting people to think about, is our consumption and what we're procuring actually meeting a need? Or where's the wastage in the system? And we have a project and a piece of work going on, an entire program around inventory management systems. And again, part of that is actually about helping and supporting trusts to get better inventory management systems so we can take that wastage out of the system. We've then got what we think about in terms of buy better. So this is about our suppliers. What are they actually doing? How are they driving down their own emissions? So actually the goods we buy and what we need to continue to buy tomorrow and in 5 years, they're actually reducing the carbon impact and the other environmental impacts of those products that we use day in, day out. And that's where the programs we do with our suppliers about understanding where they are, what their targets are, and how they're achieving those targets comes to play. The buy different is actually the what people get most kind of excited about, and is where all the sexy stuff is. So if you think about all of the innovations and value-based procurement, it's that kind of stuff. It's where we actually need to do something different. So the way I tend to describe and think about this is, when I think about healthcare and the things that we use on a daily basis in healthcare, there are some things that are the same as what we used 20 years ago, and will probably be some of the same things that we will be using in 10, 15 years time. And that's where the buy better strategy really works. But actually, if I think how different healthcare is just in the last 5 years, in terms of how the innovations that are happening, how we look at digital solutions, how we're empowering people to care and understand conditions better, there's an amazing amount of innovation that happens every day. So what are those things that we're going to look different? And this is where things like what's happening in the 10-year health plan around the shifts that the NHS is going through, where does that come into play with all of this? And what does buy different need to look like? What do our frameworks need to look like this year, next year, 5 years time, to really help deliver not only our own sustainability ambitions, but what the healthcare system needs and what the 10-year health plan needs us to deliver?
So not only do you have to be an exemplar for all these organisations that you're working with, but you also need to be able to understand the data and predict the data for the future as well. That's quite a lot of balls you're juggling there.
Sustainability.
You kind of see it as being that level of complexity. I mean, you're talking almost about designing a jumbo jet and not really knowing where all the parts are. I mean, it's that level of complexity, isn't it? Right?
Yeah, and for me, that's not something that's unique to the healthcare system. When I think about my peers and sustainability leads in all types of sectors and organisations, fundamentally the role is about understanding the organisation, understanding the context it's operating in, and juggling and understanding where it is now, where it's trying to get to make sure that sustainability is absolutely woven into the strategy for where it's going. Sustainability can't just be something you do on the side. It has to be absolutely intrinsic to what the organisation is trying to deliver. Otherwise, all you're going to do is kind of titivate around the edges and really never deliver the big opportunities and the big things that we need to deliver.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you rightly say, it has to be innate in the way that we think. Whether that's an engineer, a scientist, a clinician, it doesn't really matter. It needs to be embedded in everything that we do, right? So, yeah, that's totally true.
Yeah, and that's why that's why I do so much work thinking about green skills and thinking about, from an organisational perspective, what are not only the skills that specialists need to have, but actually any role in any organisation going forward. What does a net zero world look like, and how does everybody's part look like? What do we need to do? What skills do we need to make sure people know about and are using to deliver that?
Well, that leads us on very nicely, actually, to this main question, really, I suppose, I have for you, which is about corporate responsibility. And this is something that often I think a lot of businesses get very confused about, but it's really about businesses being committed to operating ethically and contributing positively to society and the environment. To me, that sounds like the NHS would be a true paragon of corporate responsibility, saving lives of millions of people every year. And I'm guessing from the viewpoint of goods and services, that's something that has to be worked on constantly, right? I mean, how do you go about tackling corporate responsibility in the supply chain of the NHS?
I think there's a few things that, and the way I kind of badge this internally, the way we talk about it, is some of the assurance. So it's how do we assure the NHS that we are putting in place and working with suppliers on the things we need to work with them on. And we, again, early doors in the kind of the journey of sustainability within NHS supply chain, we did a lot of work around really clarifying and standardizing what our asks were of suppliers and what our bare minimum requirements were and what our elevated requirements were. And we looked at that across both environmental and social aspects. And for us, the way that we deliver that is through what we call the 5 asks. So our 5 asks around sustainability for suppliers, and they are around the carbon reduction plan. So everybody has to have one. End of. Social value, and that talks to how we incorporate social value requirements into our frameworks and our contracts. We then have the Evergreen Assessment, and again, that's a pass-fail requirement for us. We require everybody to have an Evergreen Assessment. At this point in time, we don't set a bar. It's just you have to have started on that journey and have completed an Evergreen Assessment. So again, so we can understand actually what our baseline and our start of play is. We then have the 4th ask is around horizon scanning, and this is about being conscious of, again, that whole thing, we don't operate in a vacuum. There's lots of things going on all around us. And we have a really broad, diverse range of products and services that we offer. So we've got everything from food to FM to medtech to medical and surgical consumables. So that's a huge array of stuff. And there are a huge amount of different regulations that those things are, that relate to those things. And kind of as a matrix on top of that, we've got a supply chain that don't just serve the UK market. We've got international supply chains that are often making products and delivering products on an international scale. So it's being my understanding both what regulation is coming at us from those different perspectives. So what's happening in batteries, what's happening in packaging, what's happening in chemicals, what are the things that are going to happen during the life of our contracts that we need to be ready for and thinking about. But also what's happening in other international regulatory spaces which may impact our supply chain. So it may be that another country, for example, might ban a particular material or a chemical, and actually how does that impact what's going to happen and what's going to be available in our space. So the horizon scanning is about understanding that and thinking about our work plans for the future and what we need to be working on. The 5th element, which kind of last but by no means least, is all of the work we do around modern slavery and eradicating that in our supply chains. So again, we have minimum standards of if you don't reach a particular bar, you're not even going to get onto any of our procurements, but then also working through a risk matrix. So we have to think about our procurements and risk assess them, and are they high, medium or low risk? And we take different levels of due diligence approach depending on that level of risk to really make sure we're addressing the issues that as we see them and have we been let know about in those areas. So that's from an assurance and kind of governance perspective, that is what we set out as our assurance piece. There's a whole other set of stuff that we do around actually opportunities and products and how we might change things going forward in care pathways, but that assurance piece sits in that 5 ask space.
Right. In terms then of your corporate responsibility, it's the same, I guess, as any other international company. You've got to not just understand what's going on your doorstep, but you've got to be very much aware of what's going on internationally with those suppliers and politics and other things that are going on around the world.
Yeah, and particularly where we see this play out is in packaging. So if I think about some of the products that we source and sell into the NHS, those products are often not just specific to the UK. So they may be made in mainland Europe and they may serve the whole of the European market. And having separate production lines to produce a different packaging and different labelling for every single one of those countries is both cost prohibitive, but also a waste of resources. So that's not what organisations do. So if one of those markets that facility is supplying actually changes its regulation around packaging, and they've got to kind of do a whole bunch of work to get to that point, that's going to change what we see. So actually understanding that and being able to understand why it's changed, how that's come about, and understand if that's a better or not a better thing from our perspective is really interesting. And then also seeing how that plays out down the line as that then gets delivered into a care setting or a hospital. What impact does that have and what changes it has because of a regulation change in a different country somewhere else? So it's being able to see and have that kind of helicopter view of something over here has this impact over here, but understanding why that happens, and actually that might be a better thing, and we just might need to change or slightly shift the way we do something in this particular space to make that work.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the NHS is quite unique as a healthcare provider, and I'm assuming so too is its supply chain. So, how do you address things like global reporting? Just for me to set the scene, I'm just quoting from the GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative. Global reporting primarily refers to sustainability reporting using frameworks like the GRI standards. Companies in the UK use these globally recognised standards to report their environmental, social, and governance impacts, enabling transparency, accountability, and comparison with international peers. So that's the quote. Is global reporting something you have to consider in the NHS supply chain? And what does it mean in real terms, at the grassroots level?
Yes and no. And the reason for the yes and no answer is we don't we don't have to report in a particular way into the NHS around this stuff. But we do have to report as an organisation in our annual reports to TCFD. So actually having data that's comparable and meaningful is really important. And what we tend to stipulate is we talk about greenhouse gas protocol. So when we talk to suppliers about what
Right.
information we want to make sure it's aligned to the greenhouse gas protocol. The other kind of interesting take on this is we, as the NHS, recognised that there was this proliferation of reporting frameworks and platforms to supply this information, which is why we, NHS England in particular, put together the Evergreen Assessment so that you could, as a supplier,
Yeah.
you answer a set of questions once per year, and then anybody in the NHS could access it so that you didn't have this duplication of effort of having to report in one way for one person, different way for somebody else, to try and kind of manage burden. And that's another thing, really important kind of consideration for us when we're thinking about what we're asking our suppliers to do is around supplier burden, because of the nature of our supply chains and the broad scope of types of supplier we have, from SMEs all the way through to large multinationals. Thinking about burden is a really big important part of that. So we require them to report into Evergreen, and that's therefore only they have to do it once. We can access that information, and then we can begin to use that and actually understand in the context of that where they are and what the potential issues and hotspots we want to tackle are. But we also ask them about the types of things that they do. So do they report to CDP, so a Carbon Disclosure Project? Are they involved in EcoVadis? Again, understanding what kind of platforms and systems and they're using, so that we can see if there's any parallels or if there's any interesting trends around what our suppliers in particular markets are looking and using, so that we can leverage that. And actually, again, is there some power in being able to use that rather than asking for something additional?
You made an interesting point there about the size of the companies and things, and I wanted specifically to ask you about that. When it comes to your suppliers, obviously they range in size. When you've got large multinationals right down to small SMEs that are just have only got you as their customer, how do you ensure that your sustainability strategies are being attained by all of those organisations? I mean, you've talked about the Evergreen Assessment, but what key drivers do you use to go through that process?
So we've got a couple of things. We've got some what I call more stick and some more carrot. So the stick type stuff is the pass fail stuff. So when we think about carbon reduction plans, the Evergreen Assessment, and in the modern slavery terms, what we have the MSAT, which is a tool that we use. So those are non-negotiable. You got to do them. And when we think about how we implement them and their accessibility, so that they're not overly burdensome, it's things like cost. So is there a charge for them? You will tend to only find us using tools that are free to access. We've got things like actually the usability of it. So actually, when we think about, okay, so how long is it typically going to take somebody to respond to this particular requirement? And one of the things my team has been doing is actually we do these things ourselves. So an MSAT assessment, an Evergreen assessment, write our CLP. We've done it ourselves to really understand how much time does it take? What's the level of skill? How easy is it? So that we can make sure when we're asking people of this, one, we can talk to them in kind of from a knowledge base of we've done it. So this is kind of how we've support you to do it. But also, actually, is it a proportionate amount of time and effort for the type of contract that you're being asked for? And typically, because of the nature of what we do, getting onto one of our frameworks is opening up a doorway to a large NHS customer. So it is a proportionate response. The other thing, so that's kind of like the more mandatory, sticky type stuff. In terms of the carrot, this is where we've got some real opportunities to think about actually what is it you're wanting to sell into the NHS? What's its opportunity? How does that really help deliver what the NHS is after? And it's really interesting. A lot of the SMEs have got some really interesting innovations and interesting technologies and developments they've done to be able to actually really tell the story, and have got really interesting opportunities around how that could help drive efficiency and sustainability savings within a care setting. So there's a bit of a misnomer that some of this stuff is a bit of a burden for SMEs. Actually, they've got a real opportunity here, and actually can be more agile than some of our larger suppliers to really drive some of this stuff. But this is also where we can use things like social value and the 10% weighting, and the public procurement note that talks about social value in public tenders, to really, how do we make sure that our evaluation criteria and what we're actually asking of our supply base actually drives sustainable outcomes? And again, how we're using that to kind of help support SMEs and others in the supply chains. And it's not always about a tier one. So again, when we think about social value, our immediate supplier might be a large organisation, but actually, what does that enable them to do in their own supply chains? How does that help them support an economy in a particular location, or SME supplies into them? So it's also thinking a bit more laterally than just our direct tier one suppliers, but actually, how does this help an ecosystem around a particular good or service? The other element of all of this as well is thinking around how do we then talk to customers about this. So it's one thing to be able to kind of say, yes, we've got this nice shiny thing on the shelf over here that's got this, and this benefit. How do you then translate that into, well, what does that mean for a clinician or somebody who's going to use that in earnest? And is it as simple as swapping X for Y, or in many cases it's actually a bit more complicated than that, and it's actually a change of practice and a change of care pathway? So how do we help support that, and what's the role of the suppliers and that kind of ecoverse around them to help that shift?
When you talk about the SMEs and you talk about them being quite agile, there's an awful lot we can learn from their agility to be able to pivot very quickly to solve problems, and that's probably a really good lesson to be learned in terms of how you get the best from your supply chain, how you get the best from implementing sustainable practices, and obviously developing your corporate responsibility.
Absolutely. One of the things that I've got coming up in the next few weeks is our SME forum, and we've got a really big agenda section around sustainability and talking to the SMEs around not only lessons we've learned from some of the work we've been doing, but also what can they teach us around how they're working and how they are progressing things.
So based on that point, do you envisage the Evergreen Assessment is going to morph or change or even grow over the next 5 years? I mean, given that we've just had obviously the 10-year plan come out, and then we've lost NHS England as an entity, do you think that there are going to be significant changes to the way that the Evergreen Assessment is delivered?
In terms of the way it's delivered, I think the platform will evolve as the contract for the platform evolves, but I think the assessment itself hasn't stood still. So it was launched in June 2023, and so we've been through 24 and 25 revisions and updates, and there's been some tweaks along the way as we've learnt. So we've done some things, well, I say we, NHS England team who look after it have done some work on it to tweak it so that the questions are clearer, so people can kind of answer them in the way that they're intended. So there's been quite a lot of lessons learned around, when you say this, do you mean this or this? So it's getting that clarity of answer right. The last
Yeah.
update as well, we also did some changes in the structure of it and how it is presented, again, to help people work through it as a question set. So it will never stand still. It will always evolve as a life around us evolves. And again, we were having a couple of conversations earlier in the week around some of the information and data we're seeing and being able to collate off the back of it and what it's telling us. And we're having the same point around, if in the 10-year plan we've got these three shifts, and if we ask this question this way and we add this in, what will that be able to tell us? So we were talking about in particular around circularity and kind of footprinting. So again, thinking about the question sets in that area, that's likely to grow. There's some areas in the questionnaire that are likely to shrink because as we move through time and trend shift, they may become less relevant. So yeah, I don't envision it'll ever stand still. It will evolve as the NHS and what we need from it evolves.
And I'm sure we've got a few suppliers that are watching today's episode. So what would you encourage them to focus on in terms of sustainability, whether that be their product or their own personal, their business supply chain? How should they incorporate that into their global reporting processes, do you think?
So I'm a big fan of keep it simple and don't overcomplicate it. I did a session for some innovators who were looking to get into the NHS. We were talking about carbon reduction plans, and I think my tongue-in-cheek response to them was, don't give it to the marketing team. Just be really clear about what you're after. So the reason for that is we obviously see a lot of this stuff come through, and you can very quickly see what's lots of nice words, but what is really it saying. And the one thing we need to get really good at is having really clear, precise messaging for anybody that you're looking to sell that product to or get that product out there and used. There is a lot of words and there is a lot of scope around sustainability and what that means, and it means millions of different things to every single one of the 1.4 million people that work for the NHS. So being able to really convey succinctly what it is about your product that is more sustainable and be factual about it is really important. We need short, sharp, clear messaging. So yeah, that would be my one bit of advice, because one of the things that we're looking for on all of our frameworks when we're looking at all of the products people want to list on there is, so what does it do for this agenda? And what are the co-benefits? Because the other big thing that we talk a lot around is we've very much focused on sustainability today, but actually I'm interested in how does it make life better for the patient first and foremost? How does it then deliver on sustainability? How does it deliver on cost savings? So it's not just a one-trick pony. What is that real value offering that product has in as clean and succinct and shorter phrasing as you can possibly make it? We also do the same on our social value requirements. So we've recently updated the way we go about that. And again, one of the things I ask for from suppliers is a short paragraph on what your social value offering is. And I say short, I will cut you off. Do not be over wordy. Get to the point. Get to the point quickly. None of us have time to kind of dilly-dally around the wording. We want to get to the point so that we can go really start and focus on delivering what that value is.
It sounds like we need, rather than marketing teams at this point, we need some engineers in there to give you that short, sharp, this is what it does and this is why you should have it kind of statement. So I'm going to challenge all the engineers out there, both biomedical and clinical, to start thinking about how they would describe some of this technology in their own words. That would be quite a challenge, I think. Heidi, thank you so much for joining me on today's podcast. It has been really insightful to understand what is a huge part of an incredibly complex world within the NHS. And I think we probably need you back on the show at some point to talk in a lot more detail about NHS supply chain. But for today, thank you so much for joining me.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.